What is up, guys? My name is Enelur and I am back from the video, and today we're back with some more Let's Play Skylanders Spyro's Adventure. This time you're not really going to see much gameplay aside from the animation that plays when the Skylanders are each put on the portal. And that's because today we're doing the rest of the bios. There are a couple things that we're going to be talking about in the next episode, like for example, you may notice none of the bios have had elemental power in them, and that's because I may have mentioned last time that we're talking about elemental power this episode. We're actually talking about it next episode. But yeah, other than that, we are reviewing the Skylanders based on how good they are as a pick to have one Skylander of each element, because that is all you need to get all the collectibles, so that is what is more likely for people to pick Skylanders for. They're only going to have one of each element because they don't want to have all 32 Skylanders, which is totally understandable, even though I have all 32 Skylanders. So that being said, let's get started. Starting off with the Air Skylanders, we have Lightning Rod.
It is forecast me!
Lightning Rod is hard to use. His main damage ability leaves him vulnerable, and he doesn't have speed or mobility to get out of range of most enemies. His javelins do a decent bit of damage, but for some reason his upgrade paths don't focus on them. Instead they focus on his Grand Lightning and his Zapper Field, for some reason. Yeah, just upgrade his Grand Lightning instead, it's way better. His Soul Gem is pretty early on, and I'd only say buy it early if you want to upgrade the Zapper Field, which I've already recommended you don't do in the first place, so there's that. It is worth mentioning that Air Skylanders typically perform better in the early game, so maybe try using him early and then swapping him out later on for a better Air Skylander. So yeah, as much as I like Lightning Rod's design, he's one I don't recommend for newcomers. Up next is Sonic Boom. Sonic Boom is, above all else, decent. She's decently fast, her damage is nothing to sneeze at, and her egg toss is the reason she's so unique. She's really good here in the early game, and her Soul Gem is also here in the early game. It's actually one of those Soul Gems where I'd outright say go for it sooner rather than later. Since you'll be roaring in the direction of the babies are attacking anyway, it's just free damage. While you can upgrade her roar to do more damage, I think it's better to upgrade her egg toss, as that's where she truly shines. Coming up next is Warnado. Warnado is bad. His damage isn't great, and he has to throw himself into the enemy to do damage with his primary attack. And while the Soul Gem is in the level right after Sonic Booms, and the extra armor does help, it's better to upgrade his Tornado, as that's where his best damage lies. By that process, it's best to wait for his Soul Gem until you've gotten the rest of his upgrades. Once he's fully upgraded, he's better, but the next Skylander is objectively the best Air Skylander, so it's hard to warrant sticking with him unless you want a challenge, or you just don't mind longer fights. And lastly, for the Air Skylanders, we have Whirlwind. As I alluded to, Whirlwind is probably the best of the Air Skylanders, and probably one of the best Skylanders in the whole game, period. Her damage is great, her speed is great, and both upgrade paths are so good you could pick either one, and it would make perfect sense. Unless you're playing in co-op mode, don't even bother with her Soul Gem, as it only matters in co-op. But it shows up late enough that you might already have the rest of her upgrades anyway, if you've been using her enough. Overall, Whirlwind is one of the best Skylanders, and she won't steer you wrong. Up next we have the Earth Skylanders, and we're starting with Bash. Man, things just keep getting better. Bash is objectively the second best Skylander in this entire game. His damage is flat out insane on his tail slap, and his roll provides much needed mobility for getting in and out of fights quickly. His Soul Gem is also great, as the extra armor is really good for being in the middle of a fight, which is Bash's bread and butter. Definitely upgrade his tail slap, it's what makes him so good. The only Skylander that trumps Bash in power will be bioed later, but as for Earth Element Skylanders, he's definitely the best one, and it's not even close. Following that up is Dino-Rang. Man, it's hard to keep up momentum after Bash, but Dino-Rang is still pretty good. He's fast, and his damage is consistent if nothing else. You do have to wait for his boomerangs to come back, though that'd be a bit weird if that wasn't the case. His second attack is a pretty good keep away tool, but his boomerangs are definitely the better upgrade path. His traps just feel like bashes, but not as good, and even then Bash doesn't use them that much. His soul gem is pretty early as well, but it doesn't really do much, so don't go for it unless you've gotten the rest of his upgrades. Coming up next is my favorite Skylander in this game, Prism Break. Prism Break is my favorite Skylander from this game, something that I'm not ashamed to show my bias for in the slightest. I love his design and his gameplay is fun and interesting, and it helps that I like crystals a lot. But how does he actually play? Well, he's a ranged character, and he wants to summon crystal shards on top of enemies, and fire his beam through them, hitting more enemies. In practice, this is a bit hard to pull off, as enemies will usually be constantly moving, but get good enough and his damage will more than speak for itself. His soul gem is also pretty good, essentially letting him double his damage output if you get a good enough chain going. It also shows up pretty early, so if you want to get it early you can, but it's by no means required to get good damage off of him. Just be careful of getting too close to high damage enemies. He isn't the tankiest Skylander despite his looks. If you upgrade his crystals via the upgrade path, you get an armor boost, but he's much more fragile if you upgrade his beam, but that in turn lets him do more damage. Ultimately, either path works for him, so pick whichever you think looks more fun. And finally, we have Terrafin. Terrafin was only in the Pirate Seas level pack, but he's pretty easy to find nowadays. He's gotten so many new figures. It's worth noting that his level pack can technically be played during the main story if you have the figure, but as I'm saving the level packs for after the story since that's how the levels are numbered, for me it'll be much later. Terrafin's a brawler, there's not much you can do about that, that's just how he is, but he does have pretty good damage. He's pretty bad at crowd fights though, he just isn't tanky enough to be taking too many hits. His frenzy helps a little bit, but it keeps him rooted, which isn't the best strategy for him. Either ability path is nice, but brawler are just objectively better for damage. His soul gem is basically like Dino-Rangs, so don't worry about it until you have the rest of his upgrades, unless you just really want the convenience of picking up food and stuff up on the ground. Next batch is the Fire Skylanders, and we're starting with Eruptor. Eruptor is a Skylander that looks fun to use, but in reality he's a lot harder to pull off. He's not that fast, and his made crowd control ability roots him in place and has a long wind-up starting off, which is bad for him considering how tanky he isn't. His damage isn't that great with his Lava Lob or his Lava Balls either, so definitely upgrade his Eruption, which is the better path anyway, as it becomes much better once you upgrade it more. Revenge as a Prometheus is no joke, especially since the Eruption gets so much more spammable the more gold you put into it. His Soul Gem is pretty far in the game, so you might already have his upgrades before you get to it, but Fire Skylanders don't start getting relevant until the later stages of the game anyway, so you probably won't be using him a whole lot anyways. As for the Soul Gem itself, it's not terrible, but if you don't have the Eruption fully upgraded, focus on that first. Up next we have my GOAT, Flameslinger.
Ready, aim, fire!
Flameslinger is my favorite Fire Skylander, and he's pretty good too. His arrows are good damage, and he has a lot of speed and mobility to stay out of danger. While upgrading his arrows is probably the better upgrade path, I just love his Flame Dash too much to not upgrade it. But that's largely a personal preference thing, and either one will do really well. His Soul Gem has a similar story to Eruptor's, but it's not that good, as his Volley Shot is his worst ability anyway, so don't worry about getting it too early. Overall, pretty good pick, and one I'm never going to turn down. Following that up, we have Ignitor. Ignitor is deceptive. He may be a suit of armor, but he isn't tanky in the slightest. Until you get his Soul Gem anyway. It shows up pretty early, and it's another one of those plus 40 armor upgrades taking up a Soul Gem slot, but in this case I outright recommend getting it early, as it really lets Ignitor stick around in fights more and do so much more damage. Either of his upgrade paths are good, but the Blade Master path is where you're probably going to get the most mileage out of him. His damage is super good, especially once you've invested some gold into it. So if he's your pick for your Fire Skylander, he's definitely not a bad one. And finally, Sunburn. Sunburn is a Skylander that relies on his upgrades to be good. His teleportation is cool, but it's hard to use, and his flamethrower is better at damaging enemies anyway, so pick that one to upgrade instead. He's another one of those level pack Skylanders, and in his case, his Soul Gem will be the last one you grab if you're playing the levels in order like I am. But even if you do go for it early, it's not as good, as his Phoenix Dash isn't the best ability, and the only reason you'd be going for it is to use it to move around faster. He's hard to use as a Skylander, but with enough time, he will definitely put out some damage. Up next is the Life Skylanders, and we have Camo. Camo is, at his core, interesting. His design, A+, maybe even S tier. As for his abilities, his Sunblast is pretty standard, but his Firecracker Vines are pretty hard to aim, so I tend to focus more on Sunblast and Melon Fountain. Camo excels at clearing large groups of enemies quickly and from a distance. His Soul Gem is about halfway through the game, and while the ability itself is decent, it doesn't need to be purchased right away. If you can land his Firecracker Vines, I'd say go for it. I just struggle a lot with them personally, hence why I stick with the Melon Fountain. Following that up, we have Stealth Elf.
When you least expect it.
Stealth Elf is the Zubat of Skylanders. To quote Trigger Conroy, you wouldn't expect something so common to be so helpful. Yes, despite how common her figures are in the wild, she's actually one of the best Skylanders in the whole game. Her damage from her blades is absolutely insane, especially with that sky-high critical hit. Focus on her blades, they're her best tool. Her invisibility is nice, but the Arboreal Acrobatics is probably the best mobility tool in the whole game, as it's infinite use and really fast. And when she has her last blade upgrade, it actually does damage. Her Soul Gem is towards the halfway point, and is one of the few Soul Gems I recommend getting early, as just passive health regen is huge, especially on a glass cannon such as Stealth Elf. Overall, Stealth Elf is a great pick to add to your Skylander team, and is the best Skylander for giving someone the Detroit Become Human treatment.
28 stab wounds.
Up next is Stump Smash. Stump Smash has to share the melee life Skylander space with Stealth Elf, which is a hard task to pull off, but where Stealth Elf excels in mobility and speed. Stump Smash is the tankiest Skylander in the game, with the largest health pool out of all of them. He's a brawler like Terrafin, but unlike Terrafin, he has the health and armor to keep him around longer. His Acorns and Mega Nut are nice, but the main upgrade path I pick is a Smash and Bash, purely for the combos, because his hammers do so much damage, and he gets the amazing passive of damaging enemies that hit him. His Soul Gem is actually the next level, but it's not super good as you don't see water levels too much, especially towards the middle and later stages of the game. Focus on his main upgrades and he'll serve you well. And finally, Zook. Zook is one of the better rated Skylanders, as he can hold himself in one spot and absolutely pelt enemies over and over again. Being able to extend his range at any point is also nice, and his rockets are the main thing you should upgrade, as they provide the majority of his damage. His Soul Gem is towards the middle of the game, and is one you can afford to wait on, as his Mortar is his worst ability. If you like playing high-ranged characters, Zook is by no means a bad pick in the slightest. Up next we have the 3 remaining Magic Skylanders, and we're starting with Double Trouble. Don't let the Tiki Mask and gibberish fool you. Double Trouble is good. He likes to keep moving while dealing damage, and his Eldritch Beam is good for that, letting him move while casting it, letting you use it infinitely, and also it locks on enemies. His doubles are really where he shines though, as they pretty much require no input from him whatsoever outside of having him summon them. While either upgrade path is good, I prefer the Conjurer path, as I just have too much fun spamming the doubles and letting them do their thing, creating chaos on the battlefield. His Soul Gem is literally in the last story level in the game, but it doesn't even matter that it comes so late, because you don't even want it. By the time you get it, you don't need to be crossing over water, or really have any water to cross anyways. Only purchase this at the end if you plan on fully upgrading every Skylander you have, like me. It's pretty much on par with Whirlwind's Soul Gem in terms of practicality, but even worse than that because Healing Rainbows at least has a use in co-op mode. But despite the terrible Soul Gem, Double Trouble is so good he almost doesn't even really have to have one. Following that, we have Voodood. Voodood is in the same boat as Terrafin, but he's got a few tricks up his sleeve. He's all melee, so he wants to be in the middle of fights, but he isn't as tanky as Stump Smash, and he doesn't get an armor upgrade like Ignitor does. But he does have pretty good mobility with his Zipline Axe, but that is about it. The best strategy for Voodood is to lay a tripwire and lure the enemies into it. Fortunately, his Soul Gem is one of the last levels and helps with the strategy, so if you've been using him enough, you'll be able to purchase it right as you get it. Other than that, it's hard to pick him over Spyro or Double Trouble as your Magic Skylander, but he's still better than the last Magic Skylander. And finally, Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball is the Warnado of Magic Skylanders. His tongue doesn't do much, and his force field is hard to aim, and even when you do get to control it, you don't really get that much control until it's about to end. Even his power belt is underwhelming. His Soul Gem doesn't really help either, and it's at the end of the game, which hurts him even more. It really sucks, because he's really cute in-game, but that's honestly it. If you're only using one Skylander of each element, I'd honestly say skip Wrecking Ball. Up next, we have the 3 remaining Tech Skylanders, and we're starting with Boomer. Boomer is the only Troll Skylander, and is pretty good at what he does. His Dynamite is an amazing damage tool, and his Troll Smash is a good keep-away tool as well. But his Dynamite is the real star, so definitely pick the Demolition Troll path. His Troll Bomb is also really good, but don't try to use it to shortcut bomb puzzles, it doesn't work. Believe me, I tried. He can just passively drop Troll Bombs as he's running, and they don't slow him down in the slightest. His Soul Gem is also pretty early, and while it does help him, if you want to wait to get it till later, there's nothing wrong with waiting. Overall, he's a really solid choice. Following up with one of my other goats, Drill Sergeant. I won't lie, I have massive nostalgia bias towards Drill Sergeant. The first Skylanders I got after the starter pack trio was the Whirlwind, Double Trouble, and Drill Sergeant triple pack, so I definitely have an attachment to those 3, but Drill Sergeant more than the other 2. His gameplay can take a bit of getting used to, but when you get good at it, he's really fun. His drills have the Dino-Rang problem, and then you have to wait for them to come back before you can use them again. But his main damage tool is his Bulldoze charge anyway, so focus on that one with his Mega Dozer path. His Auto Blaster is also really good. It lets you use it while using other abilities, something pretty much no other ability can do. And if you pick the Mega Dozer path, it effectively becomes like Double Trouble's Eldritch Beam, just with more range and less damage. His Soul Gem is about halfway through the game, but the extra armor isn't as important on him, as he doesn't want to be up close all the time either. While I absolutely love Drill Sergeant, he easily gets overshadowed by the last Tech Skylander, who not only is actually the best Skylander in the whole game, but actually has their Soul Gem in the same level as him. And finally, Drobot. Drobot, as I alluded to, is the best Skylander in the game, as long as you pick the Master Blaster path. Drobot's Mega Blasters are so oppressive that he just mows down every enemy in the game. There's genuinely not much reason to pick his Clockwork Dragon path, as his lasers do so much damage. Add the mobility with flight and hovering, and you have an unstoppable force. His Soul Gem is also in the same level as Drill Sergeant's, and is the only other ability / upgrade that does fire damage that's not on a Fire Skylander. So yeah, Drobot is the best possible Skylander in the game by an absolute landslide, and should be an immediate include on any Skylander team. Moving on to the Undead Skylanders, and we're starting with Chop Chop.
Goes to battle.
Chop Chop is quite unique, being the only character that can outright block damage from a single attack with an ability. While it seems like his Vampiric Warrior path is the better bet, his Undead Defender path is actually superior in just about every way. Not only being able to stun enemies, but also reflect massive amounts of damage back at them is no joke. Don't bother using his Bone Brambler much, it's not really helpful, even with the Soul Gem. Definitely purchase the Soul Gem last. Up next, we have Cynder.
Time for trouble.
One of the only characters from the Spyro franchise to cross over into Skylanders, you really feel it gameplay-wise, as she's really similar to him. I'm gonna warn you now, Cynder is bugged. Her Shadow Dash is bugged and only damages enemies one time each, which really hurts her damage output, as she wants to be constantly dashing under enemies and avoiding damage. As such, I recommend upgrading her Spectral Lightning, as it's much more reliable in this game. It's such a shame because her Shadow Dash is a really cool ability. Her Soul Gem is a nice passive, and it's far enough in the game that you might already have all of her upgrades if you've been using her consistently, but Undead is one of the elements that only really has a presence in the later parts of the game, so it's possible you don't have them yet, in which case wait until you finished your upgrade path first. Next is Ghost Roaster. Ghost Roaster suffers from the same bug Cynder does, so that's huge points against him right out of the gate. He's the only Skylander that can be knocked out in the ruins, as he's the only Skylander that can damage it themselves. He's also one of the level pack Skylanders, so while you can get his Soul Gem early, if you play the levels in numbered order like I am, you won't see it for a long time. The problem Ghost Roaster has is his Ectoplasm mode isn't as good as Cynder's Spectral Lightning, so he really needs the Skullmaster path, but the bug makes it that much harder to use. His Soul Gem can really help with this, but considering how late you get it if you're playing the same way as I am, it can make things a real pain. His Ectoplasm mode is a good escape tool, and you may want to pick the Fear Eater path because of this, but his charge is just a better move. Overall, he'd be much better if he wasn't bugged. Thankfully, this bug he and Cynder share are patched out in the sequel, so if you end up playing any later games, you shouldn't have to deal with this. And finally, Hex.
It's darkest before the dawn.
Hex is pretty hard to use, and pretty hard to warrant using over Cynder as your Undead Skylander. Her Rain of Skulls is her biggest damage tool, but you need the Wall of Bones to use it effectively because it has such a long charge-up time. Even with the Shade Master path, which might provide consistent damage, it's just peanuts compared to her Rain of Skulls. She's one I would recommend skipping if you're only using one Undead Skylander. Definitely pick Cynder or Chop Chop over her. Finally, we have the 3 remaining Water Skylanders, and they are Slam Bam, Slam Bam is the last of the level pack Skylanders, so you already know the drill about the Soul Gem. But in this case, I do recommend getting the Soul Gem early if you can, as it's actually pretty good. Slam Bam is a melee character, but he's definitely better at it than Terrafin. His damage is nice, his Ice Prisms, while hard to aim, can definitely be effective if you know how to utilize them and go down the Glacier Yeti path. His Yeti Ice Shoe Slide is also really good for him, as it adds an escape tool and mobility some other melee fighters struggle with, and the Soul Gem turns it into an actual attack. I definitely like his Blizzard Brawler path though, as the damage and combos are nice, on top of the extra armor to make him even tankier than normal. Overall, Slam Bam is pretty good, and he has few weak points. Followed by Wham-Shell, Wham-Shell is the Ignitor of Water Skylanders. He wants to fight up close, and his Soul Gem, which is pretty early, gives him an armor boost that lets him do more of that up close fighting. But unlike Ignitor, he has a better option for ranged attacks, so it really is up to you how you play him. While I prefer to pick the Captain Crustacean path, your mileage may vary, so don't be afraid to experiment on his playstyles. And the last Skylander, Zap. The final Skylander to be bioed, and we're definitely ending on a high note. Zap's pretty good, and his Lightning Breath is pretty fast and does good damage, and the Sea Slime is really good for maneuverability. One thing I'd say is, try to pick the Tesla Dragon path if you can. He's not meant to be in large crowds, and if you pick Slime Serpent, he has to be in the middle of fights to do damage, which is not how he likes to play. His Soul Gem is nice, and you get it decently early, but it's in the last level with water for a while, so it won't come into play a whole lot. Other than that, have fun zapping your enemies. And that's the remaining Skylanders. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something about the Skylanders and figured out which ones you're going to use when you play through Spyro's Adventure. Hopefully now that these are done, I'll be able to start putting out episodes a lot faster, considering I won't have all this extra stuff to do for the episode. So next time, we are continuing on with the game and playing Chapter 2, Perilous Pastures. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell so you can notify whenever I upload a new video. And thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye everybody!